Rain over the Great Lakes country. September. A black cargo plane flying dark, turbine one coughing heat, and a man falling out of its belly into weather that should have killed him. The plane was not his, the pilots were not his people, and the insertion point was a freight yard near a city the briefing called Raccoon, which was supposed to be nothing, a pharmaceutical town. One job: photograph a handoff of stolen electronics, stay invisible, exfil to a pickup 40 clicks west. Then the storm swallowed the countdown. The canopy caught a gust that snapped a line, and the ground came up wrong. Trees, mud, the hard shoulder of a county road, the roll breaking 2 ribs. Solid Snake came up out of the mud with a knife in his fist and a suppressor on his pistol, and for 30 seconds he did not move. Rain hammered the asphalt. Somewhere far off, a dog was screaming, not barking, screaming. In that long, tearing way dogs do when something has them and will not let go. He cataloged what he had: 60 pistol rounds, a knife, 4 bricks of C4, 1 canteen, 1 ration bar, a dead transceiver, and a broken rib ticking with every breath. No backup, no extraction in range. He climbed a ridgeline instead of running, because running is what panicked men do, and from the ridge he saw it. The city was burning. Not one fire, hundreds, scattered across the whole dark bowl of the valley like a struck matchboard, smoke lying flat. The highway into downtown was a river of abandoned cars, some engines still running. No sirens. A city this size, this much fire, there should have been sirens. There were none. He watched for 40 minutes. That, too, was training. At an interstate barricade, survivors were streaming out on foot past Jersey barriers and 2 National Guard trucks while guardsmen held their line. Then a woman broke from the crowd, hospital gown, bare feet, and ran at the barrier with her arms out, and they shot her. Double tap, torso, clean grouping. She went down, and Snake watched her get up. That was wrong in a way that put his hand on the pistol without his permission. She crawled, and a man in a civilian coat and a police ballistic vest walked up and put 1 round through the back of her skull. Not a cop's movement, a cleaner's. Other civilians in coats dragged her to a ditch where a fire was already burning and fed her to it. He noted it all. The barrier was not keeping survivors out. It was keeping something in, and the men doing the shooting were not wearing the uniforms. That discrepancy was the most interesting thing he had seen in years. His job was to walk away. Every lesson of his trade said there was nothing here for him. Every lesson also said a secret this big is never left unguarded. He went down into the city anyway, because the quiet ones always think they can walk away, and then they don't. The outskirts were worse than the fire suggested. The real damage was the quiet. He moved through a gas station forecourt, past pumps with hoses still draped over car tanks, past a school bus lying on its side like a great dead yellow animal, and the quiet was so complete he could hear the rain ticking off the power lines. A town that emptied itself in minutes leaves artifacts, the dropped keys, the open doors, but the traffic on the bridge had not been swept out. It had been abandoned, mid-thought coffee cups on roofs, a child's shoe on the median, a smear of something dark on a driver's seat, where the rain was slowly erasing it. Nearest the city, the smear patterns changed. They were not roads leaving the cars. They were dragging, patient paths, all pointing inward. Snake knelt and put a gloved finger into the blood and smelled it, the way soldiers have done since before there were words for it. Iron, rainwater, and underneath, something chemical and sweet and wrong. Like a hospital corridor walked one time too many. Like a laboratory where the custodians have all gone home. He wiped his glove and started toward the gas station, the only lit sign in a 4-block radius. And on the far side of the pumps, something inside the plate glass window turned its head toward the sound of his boots. Slow, patient, like a man turning toward a conversation he had been waiting a very long time to have. He approached the dark side lot first and flattened into the shadow of an abandoned delivery van, studying the lit room for 90 seconds. 3 figures in the ruin of the checkout aisle. A man in mechanic's coveralls, a woman in a housecoat, a child in pajamas. They were not looting, not hiding, not talking, and the only one facing the door was the child, who watched it with the fixed patience of a cat at a mouse hole, and whose throat was a dark ruin under the jaw. The 3 moved with the wrongness of drugged soldiers, empty eyes, no economy, but there were no ampoules in sight, and the housecoat was soaked dark across the chest, and the coveralls were torn at the shoulder to the bone. Rage disorders, bite marks, no fear, no self-preservation except as it served pursuit. They were between him and the rest of the night. He took the mechanic first, from behind, the knife going in at the base of the skull in the place his instructors called the light switch. One clean insertion, no twist, and the man dropped without a sound and did not get up, and Snake counted that as data point 1, kill the brain and the walking stops. Data point 2 came a breath later, when the woman turned at the soft thump of the body and came at him with the arm beneath, her torn sleeve bitten to the bone, and he sidestepped, took the fire extinguisher off the wall bracket in the same motion, and put its full high-pressure blast into her face point blank. She went down. He did what was needed for the child last. Unhurried. Nothing about this night had earned anyone the right to hurry a child, and he was still wiping the knife on his thigh when he heard the breathing. The breathing was behind him, in the storeroom, shallow, fast, human, somebody crying who did not want to be heard. He put his back to the wall beside the ajar door and said, "I'm not going to hurt you. Come out, or tell me what you're doing in there, before the rest of this neighborhood gets curious about the quiet." A pause. The door moved another inch, and a woman's face appeared in the gap, young, mid-20s, gray with exhaustion, wearing a Mercy Hospital scrub top and a crooked name tag that said Darla. This? Nah. Her neck rolled in a paper towel gone through with blood. Her eyes went to the knife, to the 2 bodies on the station floor, did the math, and came out on the side of speaking. "They're dead," she said. "The whole city. The ones that—" She stopped, swallowed, and started over in the smaller, more exact voice of a woman who had been counting things for hours to keep from screaming. "The hospital filled up in one night. Bites, they said. Dog bites. Some were fine for hours. Then the fever, and then they got up. I saw Dr. Marsh get up, and he bit the janitor. The men in the black coats came at dawn. Clipboards and guns. They shot everyone who was already up." She said it as up, with no irony at all, which told him more than the story did, "and took the rest of us into the parking garage, and I heard the doors close and knew they weren't saving us. They were inventorying us. I climbed out a vent. I've been moving all night." Snake heard all of it. Men with clipboards and guns. Inventorying. He fitted it onto the civil coat men on the highway, and a picture began to assemble of an organization that treated a dying city not as a disaster but as a work site. He said, "You were bit?" Her hand went to the paper towel, fast, almost guilty. "Scratch. Nurses' stations have broken glass everywhere. It's a scratch." He looked at the towel, at the color seeping through, at the pupil in her left eye, too wide for the light. In the ledger of his mind, he made a small mark next to her name and said nothing. Men who point out wounds they cannot treat are only performing their own heroism, and he had no time for that. "The police station," he said. "Still standing?" "Yes." Something came back into her face, a small island of purpose. "The police are holding it. STARS, they said on the band. All-night survivors. Come to the station. Shelter protocol. And they said something else. Over and over. Like they knew someone out there needed to hear it. They said, "Don't trust the men at the barricades." A police unit broadcasting warnings about the barricade crews. An organization inventorying the wounded. It was a spill, and the men who owned the spill were walking the perimeter in civilian coats, shooting the evidence twice. He went to the rack by the cash register and began pulling gallon jugs of gasoline off the shelf. "What are you doing?" Darla said, somewhere between hope and terror. "Making insurance." 3 Molotovs in 40 seconds, efficient and unhurried. "There's a cruiser. 2 doors down cops in this state. Leave shotguns in their trunks. We take the guns. We take the water. We move. You know the drainage channels under this side of town? I know the maintenance tunnels. Then you're the map. Stay 3 steps behind me. Do exactly what I say. If you see me go quiet, you go quieter. We're going to the station. We're going to find out who's holding that barricade, and then we'll decide whether this city is worth the ammunition." The cruiser's trunk gave them a Remington pump, a box of 24 shells, and a road flare better than a light source because a flare is also a weapon. Snake counted. 60 pistol rounds, 24 shells, 3 bottles of fire, 1 knife, 4 bricks of C4, 1 nurse with a wound she was lying about. Not a lot to take into a burning city. More than he had taken into some places that had tried very hard to keep him. They moved down into the drainage channel under the county road while the rain filled it ankle deep, and through a grate over the rush of the water, Snake heard gunfire with a shape to it, controlled pairs. A pause. A single round. Another pair. Not panicked fire. Not the tidy executions of the civil coat men. A soldier or something as close to one as this nightmare had produced, holding a position against an enemy he understood. Snake stopped, put a hand up for Darla to halt, and listened until he knew, with the certainty of one professional recognizing another, that whoever was up there was still winning. 60 rounds, less 2. He had an answer to find, and now, at last, he also had a direction to find it in. The grate opened onto the edge of the civic block, and the gunfire was very close now, and Snake moved up the spillway with his pistol in both hands and found the mouth of the courtyard and stopped, because what he was looking at was a woman fighting a war with a population of 1. The station sat in the middle of its own dark square, like a fortress built for a war nobody had signed up for. Floodlights dead, the flag hanging limp. Behind an arc of overturned cruisers stood a woman in a blue tactical top, beret crushed against her hip, pistol working through a slide that kept jamming in the rain, and she was doing something Snake had seen done well exactly a handful of times in his life. Shooting a numerical problem. 2 rounds. Step. 2 rounds. Reload. Step each pair, finding a target in the shambling line, pressing through the gap between the cruisers, and when her slide jammed, she cleared it without looking. Snake decided she was a professional, and the most useful thing he had seen in Raccoon City so far. He did not call out. He came up the right flank through the dead ground by the flagpole and put 2 rounds into the walker nearest her back brain stem. Clean. She spun, and he raised his free hand. Palm out, muzzle down range. How soldiers who want to live introduce themselves to soldiers who want to live. Friendly fire is a civilian concept. If you were a civilian, you'd be dead twice, she said. Who the hell are you? Snake, in the neighborhood. He nodded at the parking structure across the square, where the line was thickening under the sodium lights. What's your setup? Jill Valentine. STARS Alpha. We held the station 30 hours. They got the helo, the radios, everybody outside the walls. I've been burning my own clock, keeping that gap closed so the people inside can dig out the armory. She said it flat, the way soldiers say the day's body count when they want it to stay far away. You got ammunition? 3 to a headshot down range, 1 to the brain stem up close. Snake weighed his left hand. 3 Molotovs. I've got better than killing them one at a time. That service door behind you, what's through it? Evidence room. Locker gallery. Armory 2 doors past. Then we do it the way it's done. Fire doesn't care about brains. Fire just wants to be let out. Buy me 30 seconds. She did not argue she had seen enough of the night to stop negotiating with it. She stepped into the gap and shot pairs into the advance while Snake dropped the first Molotov into the gutter spillway where dead leaves had dammed it. The gas spread, the rag took, and the whole drain mouth went up in a sheet of flame that caught the spilled fuel of the overturned cruisers and ran with it. The tide stopped, and then began to scream, and the screaming was the worst sound Snake had heard in a dozen years, and he filed it away the way he filed everything. Useful, and never to be revisited. They were through the service door in 11 seconds, barred behind them by a civilian with a bat and the 1,000-yard stare. The press room had become a field hospital without the equipment, for its survivors on desks and under them, and on a cot lay a big man in a lieutenant's collar, a shotgun wound in his side packed with gauze and faith. Marvin Branagh, awake, holding the room together by hand. He looked at Jill, then at Snake, and said, with the calm of a man who had already priced his own funeral, "You found a soldier." "Found one," Jill said. "He's asking questions." "Here's the war, soldier. Night 1. The hospital admits 100 bites, all lying. Morning 2, the surgical wing goes dark, and what comes out of it doesn't have a pulse. Chief Irons is locked in his office, drinking the evidence locker dry. The black coats are at every ramp, shooting anybody who looks infected, taking anybody who looks useful, and the state won't answer the phone. That's the whole war." He reached under the cot and came up with a key card on a lanyard, the plastic smeared with dried blood. "Came off a black coat about 4 hours back. Easier to kill than to shut up." He kept checking his watch, and when I asked what for, he said the annex was coming down in 6 hours and he wasn't going to be in it. I asked what the annex was. He said, "The family business." Then he died, smiling, like a man who'd already cashed a check with your name on it. Snake turned the card in his fingers and read the embossed pharmaceutical name and the picture that had been assembling all night: barricades, clipboards. The woman shot twice, who got up to be shot a third time, quietly found its signature line. A city had not been lost here. It had been taken down on a schedule by people with a contractor's interest in the salvage. And whatever the annex was, it was worth burning the whole county to keep secret. 6 hours is tight, Snake said. Tight enough to be a real one, Marvin said. There's an old trolley depot 2 blocks east. Umbrella buried a rail spur under it. Maintenance crews used to joke about the cold trains that ran at night. Whatever the annex is, it's down there. I'd send you the whole station. He gestured at the room, at the tourniquets in the hollow eyes. This is the whole station. Behind them, a woman in a Mercy Hospital scrub top was helping a patrolman change a bandage. Her hands shaking so badly, she pinned her wrists to her knee to stop them. Darla looked up and caught Snake watching, and looked away first. And Snake went to Marvin's side and said quietly, "The nurse who came in with me, that scratch on her neck." "Saw it," Marvin said, with a calm harder to look at than panic. "The ones that show it fast are the lucky ones. The ones that hide it." He stopped. "They're the ones that break your heart." They left through the loading dock an hour before the barricades came down. A crew of 5. Jill, Snake, Darla, a patrolman named Fields with a bleeding arm, and a utility contractor in a hard hat who introduced himself as Coulter, who claimed to know the trolley tunnels like his own cellar, who was cheerful, unhurried, and asking exactly the right questions in exactly the right order and who made the small hair stand up on the back of Snake's neck. "Your man on the cot said 6 hours," Coulter said, dropping into the dark of the depot ramp. "Me, I always work better with a deadline. Nothing personal, but I'd like to see the sun come up on the outside of this town." "Nothing personal at all," Snake said, and he watched Coulter's back go down the ramp. And he counted the way the man's boots fell on loose gravel, and he added Coulter to a list he had been keeping all night. Darla's name was first. The trolley tunnels were older than the city above them, brick-lined, black with a century of coal smoke, and the water running down the center of the tracks had begun to carry things. Snake had served where rivers ran with the dead, and he recognized the drift: a shoe, a newspaper, a child's backpack, and kept the party to the wall side, where boots did not carry off the water. The tunnel curved, the water deepened, and in the black at the far end the shapes resolved the way shapes do when they have been waiting, in pieces, and all at once. Dogs. 6 of them standing in the water at the bend, heads cocked at angles no neck should hold, and they were not growling, which was the worst thing about them. Snake worked while the others held the line. The drop was a maintenance shaft over the bend, an iron throat climbing 40 feet to a street grate, and an old transformer box on a wall bracket above the waterline, its cable casing eaten through to the copper. 3 facts sat in his head at once. The water carried current, the pack was already in it, and the breaker had been tripped once tonight. He cut the casing in 2 clean strokes, bared the copper, and bound his knife steel hilt into the gap as a bridge, then let the water do the rest. The transformer let go like a struck bell. The water flashed white. The pack arched and spasmed and went still, and the smell of ozone and scorched fur rolled down the tunnel. Jill looked at him with 3/4 respect and a cold forensic interest, and Coulter said, flat, "Remind me never to let you near my house wiring. Remind me why a utility contractor knows the word transformer." 20 years in the trade," Coulter said, and smiled. And the smile did not reach his eyes by a margin Snake clocked and banked. The rail spur was where the tunnel ended, and the secret began. A heavy steel door set in new concrete, a keypad, a sign reading, "Pharmaceutical delivery, authorized personnel only," in the cheerful lettering of a company that did not wish to be remembered. The Blackcoat's card opened it on the first try. Beyond, a loading bay and a single rail car humming with climate-controlled air, and a maintenance log on the wall, 8 years of entries. Nothing but a serial number and a route code. Repeated, like a heartbeat trained to lie. The destination field. In every entry, read, "The Annex. Level B. Subject integrity. Priority 1. Subjects." Darla read over his shoulder and the word came out wrong, like a stone caught in the throat. "They're calling them subjects. Standard nomenclature," Coulter said, climbing into the rail car with practiced ease. "For a company town, anyway. All aboard, the clock's ticking." The car ran itself. No driver, no controls, just a green light and a hum. And 90 seconds in, Snake noticed the boar was climbing west and up toward the hills where the pharmaceutical plant's white towers stood on every map. A secret above the city, not below it. The forgotten annex was a vault buried on purpose, and the train was taking them to the surface of somebody else's lie. The car stopped, and the doors opened on a white corridor smelling of antiseptic, and underneath, the older scent of a zoo kept where visitors never come. At a desk sat a scientist in a stained lab coat, pen still in her hand, coffee gone cold, the back of her head a dark ruin. Under her cold hand lay a handwritten report, its last page curling. The Raccoon release was to be a controlled calibration, a fire break, Not a forest fire. We have misjudged progression in a non-prostrated population. Watch officers are correct to call for sterilization. The Columbine Protocol was never intended to be tested in a metropolitan area, Jill said slowly. They're not trying to contain it. It went wrong, and now they're just cleaning up after themselves. Snake finished, and they can't have witnesses to the cleanup. His eyes went to Coulter, standing very still at the corridor's far end, one hand at his belt, doing a very bad job of looking relaxed. Isn't that right, Mr. Coulter? Coulter's smile arrived on time and stayed exactly as long as a smile should. Right, he said. And wrong, which is the interesting part. His hand came up empty, which was worse, because he was pressing a small black stud on his collar, and his voice came out of the collar's speaker and then the corridor's speakers, layered. Watchdog, this is Lamplight. The intrusives refused the cover story. Clear the receiving bay for redundant specimens. Lamplight out. Gas hissed from vents that had not existed a second earlier. The lights fell to a dim sodium amber. The rail car behind them cycled shut like a coffin, and Coulter, still smiling, stepped through a seam in the wall that opened only for him, and said through the speakers, almost kindly, You know what kind of place keeps a train that runs itself? A place where nobody in the receiving bay is ever allowed to walk out again. The specimens will be along directly. The gas was not anesthetic. It was meant to set the table. Snake went down on one knee as the corridor reeled, saw Jill go down, and heard Darla's voice, thin and furious. The vents, the intake side, the kill switch. Her hand slapped a junction box. The hiss died, and Snake dragged himself up by the doorframe to see her face gone gray. The paper towel at her neck dark through, her eyes too bright. I know what I am, Snake, she said very quietly. I've known since the station. I just didn't want to be a problem before I'd been useful even once. If that gas opened me up faster, then we go faster, and you use me before I'm not me anymore. That's all I'm asking. Let me be useful. Jill was on her feet, wiping her mouth, eyes on the sealed seam. We're about 3 hours from whoever answers when they say sterilization. You want the man who walked us in, I won't argue. You want to burn all of this? I won't argue about that either. Snake checked his pistol. The action was steady now. 3 hours. 22 pistol rounds. 1 carton of shells. 1 nurse with a broken clock. And 1 man who knows exactly which seam in the wall he put his name on. He shouldered the last full brick of C4 and left the other 3 where they lay, armed and timed, a parting gift for whatever came down the bore. Let's go collect him. A laboratory. In the way a cathedral is a building. 4 stories of walkways and glass-fronted bays, in fluids from clear to a color the eye refused to name, hung the product line. Subjects, rows of them arms, spines. The terrible patience of things grown for a purpose and set aside when the purpose changed. Wherever a bay stood empty, the glass before it was starred with cracks. And Snake understood. The menagerie had been disturbed, and whatever had disturbed, it was somewhere in the building with them. At the gallery's far end, in a glass pulpit warm with light, stood a man in a black mask, a blank ovoid with a single camera red eye, and at his feet, hands zip-tied, knelt Darla, taken while they climbed the stair. He wasn't the man to follow, the masked man said, voice flattened by the speaker. Lamplight is entry security. I am the watch officer you read about. The city was the test. The gallery is the factory. You've walked into the middle of a product recall. Your contamination. I'm about to decontaminate the gallery. When Jill suggested otherwise, the mask answered without a flicker. I'm not negotiating. I'm inventorying. He's stalling, Snake said, quiet and certain, because the piece had clicked the empty bays. the red eye that had not once looked at Darla. He's not afraid of us. He's afraid of what's in the bays with him. He raised his voice. Mr. Watch Officer, how long since you've heard from the men guarding the empty bays? A moment. Then the red eye moved. For the first time, to a monitor bank beside the pulpit, every screen dark, and the silence coming off the glass was the particular silence of a man finding his worst suspicion confirmed by the men he had trusted to hold the door. And along the fourth floor, between the empty bays, something moved, and the sound rolling down the stair had a shape. A wet, dragging, choral sound, like a congregation of wet mouths praying. 90 seconds got short, Snake said. Flames, Jill. Chemical extinguishers on the stair. The thing that cleared those bays didn't clear them with teeth. It cleared them because the building itself is its hunting ground. The mask gave up the pulpit code under the flat hiss of its own fear, and the door opened, and the glass windows behind them buckled 1, 2, 3. It filled the gallery the way water fills a basement, a cathedral of fused limbs and overgrown spines, sickly pale, wedged into the walkway at the height of 4 men, and on every limb, like a history of its own making, human faces sealed into the skin, eyes open, mouths moving in the same low prayer. At its core, where a heart might be, hung one face still working, gasping at the gallery air through a mouth full of dark. And Jill said, with no color left in her voice, that was the garage supervisor, one of the first ones who bit. She could not finish. The thing came down the walkway, handrails going like dry reeds, and in the choral wetness of its passage, Snake did not fire. He studied it the way a man studies whether he must fly through, the way it favored its left mass, the way the faces turned toward light, the gauges along the wall standing at steady, patient green. Then he made the calculation that would be the last one he made in this building, and said, "Give it the gallery. 200 feet to the bore. The car's still warm, and I've got a brick that wants to meet this thing's foundation. You take her," meaning Darla, gray-faced, zip-tied. "You take her to the car, and you don't wait for me longer than 90 seconds. Snake," Darla said, and it almost broke. "You were going to... Who I am doesn't matter. What I'm about to do matters. Get on the train." He left the extinguishers on the walkway like breadcrumbs, and when the thing reached the first, it paused, its faces turning, and Snake pulled the pin on the last and hurled it a white chemical flag that made every face turn at once, a flock of doomed attention, and it came for him down the middle of the gallery with a low, wet, choral scream that he heard, distantly, as the sound of a city apologizing for itself. He ran the gallery the way he had been taught to run a room along its seams, not away from it, and the thing took the bays down behind him one by one, and the C4 came out of his pack, the timer out of his teeth, and he did not have to look to know the train was leaving. The bass hiss of the bore doors was a sound he would have known in his sleep. He planted the brick at the base of the gallery's center stanchion, the one that held the walkways and the bays and 4 stories of organized suffering, stepped into the stairwell, pressed the timer, and the gallery came apart behind him in a white-hot roar, the shockwave throwing him down the stair as 10,000 tons of failure came down on a thing made from failure, and he did not stop running, because men like him are not permitted to stop. The rail car was waiting, doors cycling. It pulled him in by the collar as the bore slammed shut, and the tunnel slid past in silence until the car stopped, and the doors opened on a gray, exhausted dawn. The fires guttered out, smoke lying low along the roof lines. At the civic block's edge, the military had arrived. Real military. State Guard. Proper uniforms and flags. And the quarantine line they threw up was the same shape as the barricade, with one difference hanging on the air. These men did not know what they were guarding, and the city, in its last mercy, had stopped telling anyone anything at all. They'll call it a gas leak, Field said quietly. They always do. A black car arrived at the line. A man in a suit got out, spoke to the colonel, walked the line once slowly like a landlord surveying his property after a flood, then drove away. Snake committed the plate to the ledger in his head. Coulter, who had the important part of the smile. The mask, who had been afraid of the right thing. The black coats, the man in the suit, who surveyed the ruin as if it had turned out exactly as planned. One name at a time. The ledger would get what it was owed. At the clock tower, they found the survivors' cash rations, water, a radio that worked, a folded map with the 40-click point marked in a hand that was not his, and an envelope, no stamp, no name, holding a photograph. Old, the man in it younger by a decade, and the better part of a career, standing in a hangar on a base that had never officially existed. On the back, 2 lines in ink that had not dried all that long ago. A time and a question. Darla had gone to the far side of the tower's base, and her voice came thin and far away, the voice of a woman measuring out the last of a thing that had belonged to her. Snake, I'm not going to make the car. He found her sitting on a fallen balustrade, back to the wall, the gray morning full on her face, hands folded in her lap like a woman packing a suitcase she would not be bringing. The bite mark had gone dark. Her eyes were too bright. Don't make it a thing, she said before he could speak. I slapped the switch. I got to be useful. That's the whole story. She pressed her Mercy Hospital ID badge into his hand, lanyard still warm. It's got my real name, my mother's phone number. A person who keeps a ledger, you'll need to find the families. Tell her daughter was useful. The ones who did this want the world to remember the city as a gas leak. But the families get to know. You'll make sure of that, won't you? He took the badge. It was light, and it was heavier than anything he had carried in the gallery. I'll make sure. Good, Darla said. She smiled, and for 1 second she was 25 and whole, and then the smile frayed at the edge, and she looked past him at the smoke and said, more to the city than to him. Don't let them make it a footnote. He left her there with the sun coming up and her hands folded in her lap, and he did not look back, because the kind of man who carries every one of them knows that looking back is how you drop the ones you are carrying. The radio hissed once as he walked, and the static shaped itself into a voice with the corners sanded off. The county line, 40 clicks. We'll be waiting. We're the only ones who know you're here. A pause. Take the nurse's advice, Snake. Don't make it a thing. He touched the photograph a time, and a question that had been waiting a very long time looked back once, and the tower was empty, and the city was quiet, and he started walking west, toward the 40-click point, toward people who had known his name before. He knew theirs. Toward an extraction that was not his extraction at all. At the county line, somebody had left a canteen on a fence post and a single cigarette standing in the dust with a thumbprint pressed into the filter. He left them where they were. He knew a trap when the trap had taken the trouble to label itself. And he knew a question when the question had his photograph in its pocket. As he crossed into the wide gray country beyond the burning city, he kept the Mercy Hospital badge in his left hand, and he thought the thought that would carry him into the next war. The city had been a test, and somebody had wanted it to pass, and somebody in a suit had surveyed the ruin like a landlord counting a harvest, and whatever came next, it had his photograph, and his code name, and his cooperation was not going to be asked for. It had only ever been a matter of time before the wrong people learned his name. It had not occurred to him, until now, that the wrong people had learned it long before he ever jumped out of that plane.